Senator Heitkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's great to see you again, and thank you for a lovely visit in my office. Since we had an opportunity to talk, there's been a number of things that have occurred within the Department of Homeland Security, but one thing that really caught my attention is the discussion of a policy that would, in fact, separate mothers from their children at the border. How much time have you spent in the Triangle countries in Central America?
Very little other than vacations, no official duty.
Would you agree that the conditions on the ground in those countries are dire and dangerous for families?
I have heard that, yes, from people I have met from those countries.
Yeah. In fact, we know that the murder rates per capita are the highest in these countries, especially El Salvador. Many of the people who are migrating, many of the people who are on the move are in fact escaping very, very desperate conditions, and it's not just economic migration, it's migration to get away from the terror. You know, obviously these folks, there's been a UN project to take a look at refugeeing in place, whether it's in Costa Rica, Belize, southern Mexico, Nicaragua. There's been a lot of discussion about how we deal with the crisis in Central America, which obviously is having an effect. But how do we deal with the visual of a Border Patrol agent taking a baby away from a mother at the border?
That is a bad visual. I think what we do is we go to two underlying areas. One is we have to separate adults from children, potentially, because of threats we've heard against children. And also, we have to address the fact of how dangerous it is to illegally immigrate into the country. And I think that the reference you're making to separating mothers and children, or adults and children, was one thing that Secretary Kelly said is a possibility to help address this threat against children who are illegally migrating.
So the strategy is not to figure out how through the State Department we can effectuate support for refugees in place, which would be my preference, that people stay in the community as we work with these countries to stabilize their economies and stabilize their security. So it's not our problem, and the solution is to take babies away from mothers.
No,
that's
absolutely.
the best solution we have in the United States of America to deal with this crisis.
No, it is not. Absolutely. Secretary Kelly and I have had short discussions, but are committed to looking at both what we call the push effect and the pull effect. And the push effect would be the areas you're talking about, Senator, of fleeing violence. They're leaving for a reason. And we are committed with the other appropriate agencies to looking at both sides.
Well, I can tell you that for every mother who would be seeing someone seeking asylum in this country, fleeing from rape, murder, and potential destruction of her family, it's not a very, very humanitarian way to deal with this crisis. And I think there are other ways, and I think that the threat of taking mothers away from children may in fact provide a deterrence. I get that. But it doesn't solve the problem in our hemisphere. And if we don't deal with the problem in our hemisphere, we will continue to have disruption, and that disruption will continue to find a place for a criminal element in our country. Agreed. And so I just want to wage my strong opposition to taking babies away from their mothers.
Yes.
If we look at budget, and I've spent a lot of time on the southern border, probably more time than what I should, given that I represent a state like North Dakota. But I can tell you, from being down there, working with some of the most conservative ranchers you're going to find, they don't want this wall. You have opposition from people who you need support from to build this wall. They have a lot of really good ideas on how you can secure the border, but yet we're going ahead, in my opinion, because this is a political promise, not a vetted or actual idea that would result in any increased security. And so how committed do you think the agency is, or the agency during your tenure, to actually pushing back against strategies that won't keep us any safer, that are in fact irrational deployments of federal dollars. At the same time, we're opening up the maritime borders, we're opening up the ports of entry called airports, we're not securing the northern border, but yet we're building a wall at huge cost, and a wall that many people who live on the border, including the congressional people, including at least one senator, thinks is absolutely the wrong strategy. When are we going to actually have a discussion, not about whether we let the bids, as Senator McCaskill has been talking about, whether we actually ask for people to bid on these projects? When are we going to have a discussion on whether this actually is the right deployment of resources?
Currently, Customs and Border Protection is working on a study, a comprehensive study to look at layers of security, that not just the wall, to look at what other types of technology, infrastructure, and resources would be most appropriate and effective for the border. So that is currently working.
Yeah, but you said in addition to the wall. What I'm saying is that we need to rethink all of border security. We need to really have a conversation. Lots of great ideas from law enforcement, local law enforcement, on how we can do a better job. Some discussions about actually clearing the brush so that you can detect people in a mile boundary. There's some really creative ideas that are being discussed on the southern border that if you deploy all the resources on a wall, you aren't going to get to that discussion, because you're going to be fighting eminent domain. You're going to be fighting the local people on building this wall. And it just seems to me that someone needs to say, stop. Let's really evaluate this. And if we believe public opinion polling, it's not something the American public thinks will make them more secure. And so, you know, I just really hope, and you're a common sense person, you've been in the agency, I know, you know, and you obviously will work for the president, and I understand that. But we need to have someone and an agency that actually looks at what situational awareness means and how we best deploy the resources. And so I hope you take that message back to the Secretary. Proud to support you, as you know. And we had a great talk about the northern border, but there's a lot of things that are happening right now that it will be irreversible if we don't have a strategy.
And I will engage with those governors and local politicians also in gathering data about the southern border.